Welcome and welcome back, everybody, to the OK Grognard Show. Today is Wednesday, May 27th, 2026, 10 a.m. in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We're going to continue with part 2 of a look at the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Deities and Demigods. And part of why we're doing this is because just this last Saturday would have been the birthday of Jim Ward, hence Jim Ward Day. Obviously, he is a gentleman who has been around gaming since RPGs really first came on the scene. He was an early player, and obviously Metamorphosis Alpha and the original supplement, D&D supplement for original Dungeons and Dragons. Both of those came out in '76. I dare say he was playing for some time before then. He was also a teacher. He got out of teaching when he came into work at TSR. And good for him. I mean, we need more teachers, and we need dedicated teachers. But a calling in games. People learn from games, too. So there you go. What else we got? Jim Ward Day. I hope you had some fun. I hope you played some games over the weekend. I hope you enjoyed them. Deities and Demigods. What a crazy book. I misquoted the date. Dethangel Shadow in the chat. Good morning. Thanks for dropping in, buddy. I was just looking at the Carl Wagner cover, the Frazetta cover for the Carl Wagner book of that name yesterday. That demon coming out of the cave with its big old swim fins on. I always thought, it's just a big old gorilla. No, look at those feet. That's a demon. That is created from a number of different beings and is now being called out of its lair by a hero to be dealt with. I haven't read that book, so no spoilers, but I'm sure it's got something to do with that demon for sure. In any case, I hope you got some gaming in over Jim Ward Day. We'll talk a little bit. What did we talk about last week? I guess we began with an excerpt from the foreword by Gary Gygax, and then we continued and we discussed the preface that Jim wrote for the book. I kind of stumbled over a line. It is not intended as a treatment of world religions and the rightness or wrongness of their philosophies. I think that is key to contextualizing anything that was written in this period. I think a lot of people misunderstand when Wizards puts up a disclaimer that says, stuff that was written back then we don't agree with, we wouldn't write it in this day and age. And you know what? All that's fair to say. I think it's also fair to say that when they wrote the things they wrote back then, you've got to contextualize it. You've got to look at the world that they were in, living in and writing in at that time, and remember their beliefs were about bringing some of this cultural cachet into a gaming environment where people could deal with it. And as a former teacher, guys like Jim Ward were very happy to share as much historical and cultural knowledge as they could through the conduit of gaming with anybody who was a willing student, someone willing to learn. Someone once said, the day I stop learning, there'll be 6 feet of dirt over top of me. And you know what? I hope that's true for anybody who's a dungeon master or a gamer of any stripe, because you gotta keep learning. So we looked this over, and I think the next section to look at would be the editor's introduction, which is written by Lawrence Schick. I'll put a link to his Wikipedia page in the show notes too. He's been a a stalwart translator of musketeers and Dumas and the writings from French to English of that era. I think he's got 8 or 9 translated works from that period. He's very much into the whole musketeers genre and stuff. So look that stuff up too. But what he says in his editor's introduction to this work is, well, here it is. Deities and Demigods, the latest addition to the series of advanced D&D volumes. But what exactly is it? Let's see. It has a nice cover. Open it up. Inside, lots of pictures next to sets of stacked statistic. It must be just like the Monster Manual. There, that was easy. Now that we know what it is, we know what to do with it, right? Wrong. DDG, Deities and Demigods for short, may resemble the Monster Manual, and in fact does include some monsters. However, the purpose of this book is not to provide adversaries with the player characters. The information listed herein is primarily for the Dungeon Master's use in creating, intensifying, and expanding his or her campaign. No fantasy world is complete without the gods, mighty deities who influence the fates of men and move mortals about like chess pieces in their obscure games of power. Such figures can be perfect embodiments of the DM's control of the game. They are one of the Dungeon Master's most important tools in his or her shaping of events. Now, that is not to say, I'm editorializing myself here on top of the editor's introduction, that is not to say that this is a game where the PCs and by extension the players are only in there to do the bidding of the deities and by extension the Dungeon Master. That is to say that there are hierarchies of power within a campaign, and the deities and demigods that are introduced by the DM within this campaign world, this setting, are meant to be the upper levels of that hierarchy. Let me continue. The gods serve an important purpose for the players as well. Serving a deity is a significant part of AD&D, and all player characters should have a patron god. Alignment assumes its full importance when tied to the worship of a deity. The possibility of the invocation of divine wrath, should the player make a serious misstep, makes alignment conduct a much more vital concern. Once again, I'm going to pop in and editorialize a little bit myself, since that's my job here on the OK Grognard Show. And I'm going to say I use alignment differently. It doesn't change the importance of alignment to the deities being served by the individual player characters. I look at alignment as not something that should guide the where you go, but simply something the DM can use to keep an eye on what's going on with player characters, a listing, a gauge of what their previous actions were. Much like statistics, it doesn't tell you where you're going. It tells you where you've been. And if you go too far off the path when following a deity of one sort or another, whatever path they've set up for their worshipers, then by all means you have definitely put yourself in a bad way with that deity. And if they have any influence over the campaign setting, over the world in which the player characters exist, they may intervene, they may do something, but most of that's going to be beneath the notice of deities. So don't assume that every little curse and every oath that's uttered by a player character is going to be heard or even noticed by any of the deities that are part of the pantheon. Let me continue. Of course, serving a deity is of greatest importance to clerics. This book should help that sometimes neglected class come into its own. Players whose characters are clerics will find much more range and many more possibilities in their roles when the information herein is used to flesh them out completely. Clerics can and should have a great influence on the course of an AD&D campaign. They are prominent members of society, much more so than common fighters or the reclusive magic users and thieves. They often have a close relationship with the populace and are usually well acquainted with local leaders. They are looked up to as masters of ritual and keepers of knowledge. In addition to this special relationship with men, people as a whole, a cleric has a special relationship with his or her deity, an affinity usually denied to other mortals. This makes clerics a special class indeed, a class with a lot of room for creative innovation on the part of experienced players. Dethangel Saddle say clerics neglected. How times have changed. Yeah, no doubt about it. There was a time when nobody wanted to play a cleric. Personally, it's always been my favorite class. If you can fight and also heal things, that's including yourself, then it definitely makes you a useful character in any gaming situation in a medieval fantasy milieu. Let me continue then. At first glance, dungeon masters may well find the profusion of gods and goddesses in this work confusing. The DM will have to consider with care before choosing which pantheon or pantheons to use in his or her campaign. The DM should consider the flavor of the campaign. Is it medieval, ancient, oriental, or different from all of these? Which pantheon or pantheons will be most appropriate to the milieu? Is it possible to imagine a campaign where all the gods in this book, and perhaps more, are coexistent? This would require a truly vast world, one large enough to contain all of the worshippers necessary to sustain such a multiplicity of gods. Perhaps as in the ancient world, such different pantheons are worshipped in different regions. That's certainly something I prefer to do. My campaign world is large enough that I can have various cultures worship various pantheons. And you know what? There are cases where some of the pantheons have overlap or have similarities, as did the deities worshipped by the ancient Greeks and the deities worshipped by the ancient Romans. Very much in many cases, so many similarities were transposed from one to the other that it's hard to imagine that they weren't connected in many, many ways. Let's continue. The most important thing to remember about this book is that, unlike other AD&D volumes, everything contained within this book is guidelines, not rules. Deities and Demigods is an aid for the DM, not instructions. We would not presume to tell a dungeon master how to set up his or her campaign's religious systems. Probably no facet of AD&D varies more from campaign to campaign than this, and that's the way it should be. Lauren Schick is right on the money when he says many DMs will choose to use pantheons or systems other than the ones included herein, or will alter the information presented. Feel free. In our research, he continues, in our research and compilation of this book, we ourselves have altered many facts, either for reasons of game balance, don't forget that's included in AD&D, and consistency, or because sources conflict. Deities and Demigods is not a scholarly work or reference. It is a game accessory. After choosing which pantheon or pantheons to use, the best thing you can do as a dungeon master is to take a trip to the library or bookstore and read up on the background of the chosen mythos. There you will discover the fascinating stories behind these immortal characters and get a really solid feel for how to play them. The other half of heroic fantasy is mythology. With deities and demigods as an introduction, you can open up whole new realms of wonder. As someone else has said, the possibilities are limitless. So there you go. That is, without a doubt, an excellent way of framing how this book was created and how it can be used. I think, obviously, to contextualize a little bit, library or bookstore, absolutely, you should use libraries and bookstores. But with the internet now, which wasn't there in the beginning of the 80s, you've got options that you didn't have back then for researching a lot of this stuff. So there you go. I'll tell you what, next week we're going to do a part 3. We're going to look into some of the specifics of the Deities and Demigods book. I think one of the important things to note within here that's very useful for DMs are the ability scores that go beyond 18. Because with various magic items and spells that are in the core set, you can definitely rise above those limits that are otherwise there, and you get some good guidance from this book. As I say, somewhere down the road, in the future, we'll do some individual episodes on the various pantheons. I certainly want to do one on the Arthurian mythos. Definitely use Norse in my own campaign setting. So both of those need to be looked at a little more closely. The changes I made, the things I might have done differently, even if I had an idea that, these various deities were part of my campaign setting. And you know what? Ancient Greek Zeus, ancient Rome, all of the deities from those are on the fringes of my main focus area of my campaign setting. So, without a doubt, I have many pantheons sprinkled about my campaign setting, and some of them are come into direct contact by many of the player characters over the many years. Started this whole thing in 74, so it's bound to be a big mix, a kitchen sink approach, if you will. So let's just call that a day and say thanks for popping in on this. I appreciate it. We've been looking at the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Deities and Demigods, part 2 of probably 3, more even, as we go over individual pantheons and days to come. I hope you had a good Jim Ward D last Saturday. Don't forget, this show streams live on Twitch each Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central, and then it's archived on YouTube. Like, subscribe, follow, do all of that great stuff. Be very much appreciated. And do support the channel, even at the free level on Patreon. It'd be very much appreciated. You can join such illustrious Patreon supporters as Tom Tullis of Fat Dragon Games, Carlos Lysing of Castle Entertainment, Heath Farndon of the AD&D 20, Dave O'Brien, unauthorized user, Dethangel Shadow, who is in the chat today, thanks for popping in, Heidi and Eric Gygax Garland of Gaxland, Vince Ragusa of the Maroon Room, an excellent prog rock band, Daniel Caldwell of Griffin and Gargoyle, Martin Thomas of Daddy Roll the One, who gave us a nice shout out yesterday on his YouTube channel. Thank you for that, Marty. Appreciate it. Christian Garcia, Stephanie Lesniewski-Gruchow, Cera Toppilopkus, Colin Szablewski, sorry about your abs, my friend, Zeno, Sergeant Zeno, Bruiser, Nate Mosier, Rod Garcia, John Smith, and as always, Shane Bradley, DM Extraordinaire. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.